Hey everyone, this is Scott from SertMedia.com, and in this video I will be discussing Genesis Pro. It is a paid add-on from StudioPress or WordPress engine since it was acquired by them. I'll be going over what's in the plugin currently, and I'll be talking about what is to come in the plugin because the plugin in the current stage is still very new. But in the future updates, they're going to be expanding on it quite a bit, especially come August, so next month. And I'm going to be talking about that as well. This is not really a review, but it's sort of an overview of what's in the plugin currently. All right, so let's get started. Genesis Pro is a site building tool, as they self-described it. When I was looking at this product, I actually brought a question up into the Genesis users group on Facebook because I didn't understand what the product was. And the only information I could find that was useful at the time was this little video. And they had another marketing video that was like 1 minute long, and it wasn't helpful, even a little. It just wasn't helpful. And I tried to get feedback from the community, and most people were very confused about it themselves. And the Chris Garrett, who's the marketer for StudioPress and WordPress engine, he commented and he gave some useful insight. I ended up purchasing the product because, number one, I do love Genesis. It is the framework I use for my own website. And using the block, I used the block editor myself on my own website as opposed to using something like Elementor. And I have used Elementor before, and I've even given it to somebody who has very minimal experience, and they built a website. I had this website built using Elementor by somebody who had virtually no experience, and this is what they came up with. It wasn't a bad website, but it has performance pitfalls because Elementor in itself is quite bulky. You run it through PageSpeed Insights, and even for a site that has no render blocking assets, everything is loaded with a lazy load, it wasn't all that performant, and that's inherent with Elementor because it's very bloated in its feature set. It's very large, and even with a very uncomplicated website with no videos and one static image, the performance did suffer. It's never going to be as fast as just using the native editor in WordPress because of the large feature set. Genesis Pro is I'm going to call it Atomic Blocks Pro, at least currently. So Atomic Blocks is the free plugin that Genesis released and has been used in a lot of their plugins, in a lot of their themes that they've released on the StudioPress website. Genesis Pro is also the collection of themes from StudioPress. So if you had the Genesis Pro Plus, which I did, it was a $500 one-time purchase, and you got access to all themes and future themes as well as updates. It was honestly way too good of a deal. They couldn't sustain that business model forever because you'd eventually just run out of developers to sell it to. This now includes the themes, and it includes basically what is now Atomic Blocks Pro is what I'm going to dub it for now. The Genesis Shapers blog post, which came out today too, and I was reading this, they talked about some of the direction that they're going to do. They're going to be modifying, they're going to be adding new layouts, new features. It's going to be rebranded, and it's just going to be a much better plugin. But that's next month, at least of what they're saying, around the middle of next month. It'll be renamed, and it'll be clear of what it is. But for now, we have to talk about what we're given and whether it's valuable to you, and that's going to depend on your workflow. Genesis Pro is an addition to the block editor in addition to the themes. So I'm assuming that you've looked at Genesis Pro because you were a Pro Plus customer or you were already paying for Genesis themes like I was. So you're looking at Genesis Pro and you're wondering, what is in it? Why is it $360 a year? And how does it compare to something like Elementor? There are some fundamental differences between this and Elementor. Elementor is its own page builder. It has its own means of storing data in your database for its markup. It has its own add-ons. It has its own development plan that's completely independent from the block editor, also known as Gutenberg. In the WordPress 5.5 video, I really showed you some of the improvements that are coming in the block editor, especially with the sidebar navigation where the blocks will be listed over here instead of being in the little toggle that made it impossible to navigate. That's going to make Genesis Pro a lot stronger. And I have tested it, but on this site I'm going to be showing you is running on 5.4 since that is the latest release. The reason that's going to make it a stronger plugin ultimately comes down to the navigation of blocks. And that is a weakness that all these block plugins really suffer from, is navigation. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to create I have this empty page here, and I'm just going to show you what it's like to use it. First of all, you got to give props to Genesis. It is just such a simple way to manage your site. I mean, you've installed, I installed Jetpack because I like Jetpack forms. It's a very weird thing that I like, but the one thing I love the most in Jetpack is Jetpack forms, because it just integrates very nicely and it has a block editor functionality, and it's just amazing. I always use Jetpack, which, controversial opinion, but that's my opinion to have. I installed Genesis eNews Extended and the Simple Social icons, and these were added from the installer of the Genesis sample theme. You'll notice that Atomic Blocks was installed but deactivated, and that's because the Genesis page builder, which looks like it's going to be rebranded to something like Genesis Blocks, is a drop-in replacement for Atomic Blocks. As soon as you activate the Genesis page builder, Atomic Blocks is disabled because it's basically Atomic Blocks at its core. You install it, you get this nice basic menu over here, and it's just your general welcome screen, and underneath your settings screen, you put your license key in so that way you get your updates, and you can also put in a MailChimp API key. I'm gonna not go over there because it does expose the license key, and I obviously don't wanna share that for everybody to enjoy, but it's an interesting panel. Under the settings, you also get access to a block management tool. You know, we'll just come over here. So I'll just bleep out the subscription editing, but you come over here and you got a block permissions screen, and it's fine. What it does is you basically click on any block type. These are blocks that have been added by the Genesis Pro plugin. You click on whatever one you want to add, the profile box, and you can modify some of the default behaviors, and you can modify what permissions somebody is able to enable. So for instance, if you want to give somebody access to the profile box, but you don't want to allow them to modify the font size, you're able to do that. And you can turn it off on a per user role basis. Keep in mind that if you have something like WooCommerce installed, which it uses, I believe it's the shopkeeper or shop manager, one thing to keep in mind is that that's going to be by default unchecked for everything. So I would keep that in mind, but all the default WordPress core user roles will be fine, and it's acceptable. You can't do too much in here, but it does allow you to disable functions for certain users. Really, I could see this being useful for like the sharing options. If you want to specify specific branding or the sharing links, you could restrict that to administrators. So that way your authors can't fiddle around with it, because that is one weakness in Genesis, and not Genesis, but in the block editor, is because it's so open, you have to kind of restrict what authors and editors are able to do, because otherwise they'll have too much control. And that's kind of just a weakness of the block editor. When you give somebody a ton of functionality, they're going to use it however they want, and that's not necessarily a good thing if you're trying to keep your blogs a consistent style and a consistent theme, and you don't want to have somebody fiddling around with it just so that way if you have a heading 2 tag in your blog post and it's set to 50 pixels, you don't want to have to worry about your author setting it to 40 pixels so that way it all fits on one line and they like that aesthetic more. It's just a good way of keeping consistency across blog posts with the different types of blocks. We're going to go ahead now and we're just going to jump into what it's like to use the pages, really the block editor. I'll also note that it adds a portfolio post type over here, and that's fine. You can modify the portfolio types information, which is just a taxonomy, and again, it's fine. It's based off of categories, so it's a hierarchical category structure, and it's fine. The one thing I do wish, though, is I could turn it off. There are times when, there's actually just a lot of times when you don't really need a portfolio post type, and you can go ahead and deregister it in WordPress core with a function, but I just don't think it should be something that's active by default. Jetpack also has a similar functionality to enable portfolios as a post type, but they allow you to turn it on or off. I wish that functionality was in here as well, because there's a lot of sites that I just don't need portfolio items added for, but I could still use this block editor for. Common one would be like a real estate website where you don't necessarily have a portfolio, but you may integrate with a IDX plugin. So you come over here and it's just good old standard block editor. You either love it or you hate it. The real power of this tool right now comes up here into the layouts section. So the layouts is essentially Atomic Blocks layouts, but there's a lot more in here than there were in Atomic Blocks. And I'm just gonna go through them and kind of show you what they look like. So you come to the layout section and you get this screen, very easy to use. And there's a couple of things that you could do. Number one, you can also add a custom layout. And if you click here, it'll take you over to their documentation for developers to create layout blocks. This is fine. This is useful for devs, but if you're an average user and you're just using this, it's not going to be that helpful for you. Love-hate relationship. Some devs choose to develop custom blocks and custom layouts. I would say that most of them don't develop custom blocks anymore because the block editor requires a very different skill set than not pre-block editor WordPress. And you could use something like advanced custom fields to make blocks, but the functionality is there if you want to develop custom blocks and custom layouts that you can then save and just reuse. I do think this is powerful though if you are an agency, particularly one who does most of your content as web design, because you can create a collection of layouts that you basically just replace the images and content for per client. So if you're an agency that focuses on law firms, for instance, and you build a lot of websites around law, typically they have a very similar layout style. You have your giant header, you have the list of different practices they do, their testimonials, and then a call to action to either go to their blog post or to have a contact form. And this is just the home page as an example, but the layout tends to be very consistent. So that's a very useful bit of functionality for you. But let's talk about it if you're not a developer who is just a hobbyist. So you come over here, you click on this, you get the layout selection. You have sections and layouts. Sections are parts of a page. So this is not an entire page that you're selecting. You're adding a small chunk to a page. So for instance, if you click, let's find one that's not added in Atomic Blocks, this profile header. This is only the profile header that gets added. It doesn't add anything else. So this is just one piece of a page. You can combine multiple sections to obviously get a page layout. And if you want to add another chunk, you could go ahead and use the layouts button up here, or you could use the layouts block itself. And you can just go here, add the section, and you kind of have a page that's thrown together right there. So if you're somebody named Amanda, you now have your profile image, and we work with some of the best brands. You could just change the verbiage and swap the logos in it, and it would look great. And the best part is it's responsive. The text is legible. I don't really notice any major accessibility issues when I was testing around with some of them. You can just go ahead and check your Motorola G4 option, and look at that, it's great. And it doesn't load really all that much in terms of JavaScript. If you look and you type in the Genesis page builder, it loads the Atomic Blocks Font Awesome CSS, the Atomic Blocks Block CSS, the front end styles CSS, and then in the footer, it loads the Atomic Blocks Dismiss JS. That's all that it loads. There's very minimal JavaScript, which is quite impressive. JavaScript tends to be the item that hammers on your mobile performance because mobile device CPUs are slow. They're just slow. A 3.0 gigahertz processor on a mobile device versus desktop device is very different in their actual applications. And that's because mobile device CPUs tend to be very specialized, whereas desktop CPUs kind of do everything. That's why you tend to get really bad page speed insight scores on very heavy JavaScript websites. And there's not really all that much you can do about it, but my general rule of thumb is I try to avoid using as much JavaScript as possible. If I need to add share buttons, I could use something like add to any, which I see on tons of websites for some reason now. Or I could use something like NovaShare that adds no JavaScript, only uses CSS, adds about the same feature set, and is significantly better for performance. And that's where the advantage of using the block editor comes in. Most blocks tend to use minimal JavaScript, which will yield you much better performance. I'm going to try and recreate at least around the same kind of design idea. This, the scotthartley.dev website, but using the blog. I'm going to use predefined sections to build this page, or I'll just look at the layouts as well. So we come over to the layout section, and let's see if there's anything that I can find. There is a profile section, a business section, which is a business page, product to launch, which is great for collecting email addresses. Freelancer, basic freelance page, that might be pretty good, but I think it uses a blog, and I'm not going to add a blog on this website. Pricing, mobile app, professional services. This one's actually very nice looking. I will go ahead and show you what this looks like. It doesn't really fit this specific one because it's a profile, but it just looks really nice, so I thought I'd share it. You click it, it already installed the full layout, and it looks like this. As you can see, there's a little bit of spacing up here from that other block, but I'll take that out. This looks really nice, and the great part is it does integrate with Google Maps, and it uses the Google Maps iframe instead of the Google Maps JavaScript API, which is advantageous for two reasons. Number one, you don't load the JavaScript, so you can lazy load this, and it's going to be much better for your performance. But number two, because that's not the Google Maps API, you don't need to pay for it. It's completely free. Anybody can embed it anywhere, and it looks great. And it adds useful information that most Google Maps things don't add. For instance, your reviews. The only time I would say you don't want to show how many reviews you have on Google is if your business has very poor reviews, in which case you may not want to show the Google Maps listing at all. But it looks visually appealing. And if you want to modify something, for instance, like right here where it says lawyers, class, clients, years running, these icons are images. You can easily swap them out. If you want to replace the name of these clients and you have images of them or their businesses, you can easily do that. You can modify it. Civil rights, like attorney, and it would obviously change it. You can modify the text. If you want to add more, you can duplicate those rows, so it'll add a second one right below it. You can add more. You can take away the images by just clicking on the X. If you don't have any that fit, we'll show you what this looks like. And we just took away the images. We didn't take away the block in case you wanted to upload them again. But as you can see, it still knows, okay, this image doesn't exist. So we could still shrink the container and it looks visually appealing. It adds a featured questions section, which actually looks very nice. One thing I would say for FAQs is if you can try to use the Yoast SEO block, solely so that way you get the advantage of the schema markup for appearing in Google search, which can lead to a higher click-through rate. But this is still very nice looking. I would still highly recommend using this type of layout. You can change the color of pretty much anything relatively easily. You find the item you want to modify, click over here. You can change your button color. You can set it to your brand colors that the theme sets by going into Appearance, Customize, and selecting the primary colors. Not all themes integrate with this way, so keep in mind. This is just the Genesis sample theme, so it does allow you to easily do this. And you can easily swap out the images. This is an image, it is not an icon. You can modify if you want to make them rounded or not. And it's really easy to use, and that is the strength of the block editor. And there's quite a few layouts, and I do think that when the Genesis Blocks / Genesis Pro plugin adds more layouts, that's when you're going to see more adoption. One thing that I will say, at least that is, in my opinion, a weakness of this, which is kind of a weird weakness. There is no way in Atomic Blocks currently to add pagination for post. Kind of a weird complaint, but here's what I mean. So you can go to the layouts and you will have a layout for your blog. And I know that the title says blog home, but we're just gonna do it anyways. You come over here, you have some really nice looking options for latest news, a food blog, or a travel blog. I'm assuming most of you who are using Genesis are probably using it on a small business website, but I do think that's a weakness that Genesis and Atomic Blocks have had. They're so focused on business websites that you kind of lack when it comes to creating editorial websites or very blog heavy websites. And the two themes that they have, I think, is Genesis Magazine and like Genesis News. They're very bad. They're really old. They don't look good, and their feature set's quite small. But you can go ahead and install this, and here's where I get my one major gripe. I could not use the Genesis page builder on my website's blog because I have no way of setting up pagination within the post and page grid. Your options come down to the number of columns, the number of items to display, and sure, you could set this number to something insanely high, but that'd be bad for performance, and it'd be very annoying to your users to be loaded if you have 100 plus posts all on one page initially. There's no way to add a infinite scroll, at least it's not documented anywhere that I could find. And there's no option just to add a little but arrow that leads you to a collection of new pages. And this is my biggest gripe right now. Of all the blocks, this is my least favorite. There's only one plugin that I'm aware of that adds a pagination. I think Cadence might as well, but the one I'm thinking of is the add-ons for Gutenberg. It's by the same people who make the Astra theme. And that is a complaint I have. Honestly, you should have some way to add pagination, because if you're showing posts, you need it's typically on your blog page, and there needs to be a way to at least click to get the next collection of posts. I don't care if those posts are fetched with Ajax. I don't care if it's a button that loads more on click. I don't care if it's an infinite loading as it scrolls down and it fetches more. There just has to be some way, because if there isn't, you cannot use this very nice looking layout on a blog page where people expect some sort of pagination to get your older posts. My blog, people do use the pagination on there, and that's just this standard WordPress blog page. It's really simple, and it just fetches the images through Genesis. And I would want to use this to build the blog page, but I can't with the current tool set that is included in Atomic Blocks. And I try not to modify or go too far into the installing a block plugin for every solution, because it's just not a very good way of handling it. I do think that this plugin is appealing. I do think that its user interface is great. I do think the block that it has, they're great from a performance standpoint. In fact, I'm going to show you that really large, complicated general home layout. That was the professional services, if you remember the name. We're going to go ahead and install this, and I'm going to update this, and I'm going to show you what this gets on PageSpeed Insights to prove the point of the advantage of the block editor, which is typically just better performance. So we'll come over here. We're going to get flagged probably for a slow TTFB because I do not have any server-side caching enabled, but that's okay. We're just trying to see about roughly where we're at. So it was a 76 on the other one. That one was optimized, assets were bundled, asynchronously loading everything that could be, had a CDN, had the whole 9 yards. This one gets a 52, and its biggest gripe is render blocking assets. We could fix this by just installing any free plugin, really. Deferring off-screen images. WordPress core is adding this, but you could also just, it's right in Jetpack, and that would solve many issues. So you can go into performance. And the Jetpack one is definitely not the most efficient means, but the performance is quite good. We have very little unused CSS. We could probably strip out dash icons. I don't think I'm using it on here at all. And we're not lazy loading the iframes, but the unused JavaScript only gets really flagged for jQuery, which is probably not necessary. We might be able to strip that. And we're loading an odd amount of CSS, mostly for dash icons, Jetpack, and the all.min.css for font awesome. The TLDR can be summed up as this. Should you buy this product? In its current state, I don't think it's ready for widespread adoption. But if you're going to be going in the direction of the block editor anyways, and you've decided it either due to technical reasoning, you really just want to get clients on it, you want to have some kind of foundational base, honestly, the Genesis setup with the block editor, there's no problems you could have with it. 56 for an unoptimized website, that's pretty good considering the other one was 72 and was completely optimized. You can't beat that level of performance. And also because there's very little JavaScript, you could probably integrate this with the, what is it, the AMP for WordPress plugin, or just the AMP WordPress plugin with very minimal issues if you wanted to get AMP support. That's another advantage of the block editor that you're not going to have in Elementor. You'll never be able to, in Elementor at least, to get that one-to-one copy of functionality because of its heavy reliance on JavaScript to do most of the work. So you have the toss-up. If you need a page builder now, and you want to, and you're very creative, and you're building very complicated websites, but you don't know how to code very well, or just you don't want to, Elementor has the advantage of great documentation. Honestly, you could find documentation from anybody in the community. You could find it from them directly. They have their blog. They have tons of pre-made layouts. This one has a lot of sections and a handful of layouts. Elementor has tons of them, absolutely tons with their library. The downside of it is you're paying in performance. The Elementor website will just never be as fast as using the block editor. It's just not going to happen because of the architecture. Quite frankly, you have too much stuff loading that just isn't necessary, but because of the way Elementor bundles its assets, you don't have much of a choice. The advantage of the Genesis Pro / Genesis Blocks plugin is going to come down to the performance improvements, the fact that it uses the block editor, which you may not think is an advantage, but this is the direction WordPress is going in anyway. If you're wanting to future-proof your website, using the native editor makes the most sense to me, as opposed to using a proprietary third-party solution. And that's why I never got on the train of saying, you should most certainly use WP Bakery. And now, years down the line, WP Bakery hasn't gotten all that improved. It's got performance issues all over, and the development is kind of stagnant, to be frank. And Elementor is kind of the same way. It just has way better marketing than WP Bakery ever did. It's got wide adoption because of Astra and the community getting behind it. Whereas Genesis has always had like that fabled name among developers, and the Genesis Pro plugin extends that name. You can't go wrong with either one. I don't want to say you should use this certainly over Elementor. You're going to have a lot of headaches building with the block editor. You're not going to like it. The block editor is very finicky. Just yesterday, I was playing around when I bought this and I was playing with it. I ran into issues with the blocks not being able to be deleted. I just couldn't. I don't know what its issue was. I even went into the edit HTML, deleted all the block editor stuff, and then the block came back and I wasn't able to delete it. There was just no option on the triple dots to remove the block, and I had no idea why I did that. Control A didn't work either to select everything and delete it. Very weird scenario. Probably an outlier, but it did happen. And I probably couldn't replicate it again like most one-off bugs like that. So you got to give it a take. If you're looking for future-proofing, Genesis Pro, in my opinion, makes more sense. It makes more sense because this is the direction WordPress is going to go in. And that's kind of always been Genesis' selling point, is it's the native WordPress way of handling things. The block editor will be a powerful tool, whether you like it or not. It's seeing large improvements from accessibility to performance to just ultimately flexibility. Elementor has tons of templates. Millions of websites use it. I even own the Unlimited Pro license to it, and it's great. It's a great plugin. I won't say Elementor is bad. It's just proprietary. And with any proprietary system, if the company goes away, you're going to have a bit of a headache, where the advantage with this is even if Genesis and WordPress can go bottoms up, your block should still work at the end of the day, unless for some reason Gutenberg never gets out of the state of fundamentally changing how various parts of the block editor work. They should be done with that hopefully by now, but that's something to keep in mind. If you have any specific questions about this, or you want to see just really more of what you can build with this and some of the layouts, ask in the comments below. I'll try and throw like a blog post or something together showing all of the sections and layouts that are currently available. That will take time, but I think it would be a good thing to showcase of what's in the plugin currently and what you're getting. I will answer any questions that you ask below to the best of my ability. Otherwise, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.